Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Hard Answers. I'm Tom Graham. The combined efforts of the Secret Service and the Department of Education identified 37 incidents of targeted school-based attacks committed by 41 individuals over a 25-year period and culminated their findings into two guides. The final report and findings of the Safe School Initiative, Threat Assessment in Schools, a guide to managing threatening situations and to creating safe school climates. I'll put the links for the two guides in the description below. The Safe School Initiative. The final report and findings of the Safe School Initiative. Implications for the prevention of school attacks in the United States is a recent product of an ongoing collaboration between the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education to begin to answer the two central questions. Could we have known these attacks were being planned? And if so, what could we have done to prevent these attacks from occurring? The objective of the Safe School Initiative was to attempt to identify information that could be obtainable or knowable prior to an attack. That information would then be analyzed and evaluated to produce a factual, accurate knowledge base on targeted school attacks. This knowledge could be used to help communities across the country to formulate policies and strategies aimed at preventing school-based attacks. The Safe School Initiative examined incidents of targeted violence in school settings, school shootings and other school-based attacks, where the school was deliberately selected as the location for the attack and was not simply a random site of opportunity. The 10 key findings of the study were: incidents of targeted violence at school rarely were sudden, impulsive attacks. However, the time span between the attacker's decision to mount an attack and the actual incident might be short. If a plan is found out, authorities have little time to react. Prior to most incidents, other people knew about the attacker's idea and/or plan to attack. However, for various reasons, school politics, not wanting to betray a friend, general mistrust of the administration, these people rarely tell an adult. Most attackers did not threaten their targets directly prior to advancing an attack. There's a big difference between someone who makes a threat and someone who poses a threat. The child talking about bringing a gun to school poses a threat. The kid that threatens another is making a threat. Both should be taken seriously. Administrators should not wait for a threat to be made before investigating. There is no accurate or useful profile of students who engage in targeted school violence. Trying to profile kids runs the risk of, one, the great majority of students who fit any given profile of a school shooter will not actually pose a risk of targeted violence, so you're wasting your time and your resources. And two, using profiles will fail to identify some students who in fact pose a risk of violence, but share a few of, if any, characteristics of prior attackers. 5. Most attackers engaged in some behavior prior to the incident that caused others concern or indicated a need for help. Individuals, including adults, in contact with the attacker may have observed something of concern about the student's behavior, but not of sufficient concern for them to notify anyone in a position to respond. Educators and other adults can learn how to pick up on these signals and make appropriate referrals. 6. Most attackers had difficulty coping with significant losses or personal failures. Moreover, many had considered or attempted suicide. Most students who face a significant loss or who have difficulty coping with such a loss are not going to be at risk for a school-based attack. In cases where there is concern about the possibility that a student may engage in targeted violence, attention should be given to any indication that a student is having difficulty coping with major losses or perceived failures, particularly when these losses or failures appear to have prompted feelings of desperation and hopelessness. An inquiry also should anticipate changes in the life of a troubled student and consider whether these changes might increase or decrease the threat the student poses. 7. Many attackers felt bullied, persecuted, or injured by others prior to the attack. Bullying was not a factor in every case, and clearly not every child who is bullied in school will pose a risk for targeted violence in school. Nevertheless, in a number of incidents, the targeted school violence studied, attackers described being bullies in terms that suggested that these experiences approached torment. These attackers told of behaviors that, if they occurred in the workplace, likely would meet legal definitions of harassment and/or assault. The prevalence of bullying found in this and other recent studies should strongly support ongoing efforts to reduce bullying in American schools. 8. Most attackers had access to and had used weapons prior to the attack. Access to weapons among some students may be common. The large proportion of attackers who acquired their guns from home points to the need for schools and law enforcement officials to collaborate on policies and procedures for responding when a student is thought to have a firearm in school. In particular, schools should be aware of the provisions of the Federal Gun-Free Schools Act, which requires that all schools expel students who bring a gun to school and should report all violations to local law enforcement officials. 9. In many cases, other students were involved in some capacity. This finding highlights the importance of considering what prompting and encouragement a student may receive from others in his life that influence his intent, planning, or preparations for a potential attack. Any investigation of potential targeted school violence should include attention to the role that a student's friends or peers may be playing in that student's thinking about and preparations for an attack. It is possible that feedback from friends and others may help to move a student from an unformed thought about attacking to developing and advancing a plan to carry out the attack. And finally, number 10, despite prompt law enforcement responses, most shooting incidents were stopped by means other than law enforcement intervention. The short duration of most incidents of targeted school violence argues for the importance of developing preventative measures in addition to any emergency planning for a school or school district. The preventative measures should include protocols and procedures for responding to and managing threats and other behaviors of concern. However, the emergency planning for a school or school district is not addressed in this document. Emergency planning is addressed by a FEMA document called Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans. The guide to this was developed jointly by the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. I'll put the link to this guide in the description below. The guide covers a number of scenarios, but specifically about an active shooter, it says, the school may have to respond in minutes to an active shooter. Active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve quickly. Because of this, individuals must be prepared to deal with an active shooter situation before law enforcement officers arrive on the scene. The guide then tells you to think about in what circumstances it would be better to evacuate or hide, about how to inform everyone in the school of the active shooter, and sharing information with first responders, having active shooter drills, and not to forget about your disabled students. Summary. The best defense is a good offense. The key to preventing targeted school violence is threat awareness and assessment. Schools should read a publication by the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education called A Guide to Managing Threatening Situations to Creating Safe School Climates, and develop their own processes to assess threats and take preventative action. Retaliation for bullying seems to be a common thread in a great number of school shootings. So zero tolerance policies for physical and internet bullying is the obvious knee-jerk response. However, school administrators and teachers need to be aware that their own behavior can be seen by many as bullying. If a student says there is no wage gap and the teacher says they're a misogynist, if the student says we need immigration control and the teacher calls him a xenophobic or Islamophobic person, if our schools themselves are in the business of bullying students that don't agree with the political stance that the school has chosen to support, then it's the school themselves that will potentially create more school shooters. And finally, I hope you notice that none of the agencies mentioned more gun control laws as a viable solution to make schools safer. Please click the subscribe button to see more videos like this. If you disagree with me, please leave a comment. My ears are always open, and I learn new things every day when people disagree with me. I'm Tom Graham. I'll see you next time on The Hard Answers.